Welcome to another episode of Pod for Good. I am your Chief Philanthropod, Jesse Ulrich.
And I'm your Vice Admiral Work-from-Home-Pod, Chris Miller.
And this is a podcast where we hear from the change agents and experts trying to make the world a more resilient place. Today's guest is Marc Baizman, Senior Admin Evangelist for Salesforce.com.
We talked to Marc about using technology to solve organizational needs for nonprofits, whether the current crisis will lead to a fundamental shift in how organizations use technology, and resources to help everyone make better technology decisions.
Enjoy, everyone, and also wash your hands. We are very excited to have Marc Baizman, who is the Senior Admin Evangelist from Salesforce, all the way from San Diego. Hi, Marc.
Hi. Hi, Jesse. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Nice to be with you.
You know, people should know we are recording this on March 16th, so day one of the apocalypse, day two.
Well, I guess
We're not
it
sure.
depends.
Yeah, we
For
haven't
some
been
people, the apocalypse has been
slow
going for a while.
build.
Yeah, it's been a slow build, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Today is like lockdown day.
yes, lockdown day. This is the first sort of Monday back, and, you know, first Monday of spring break for many people, and, you know, people are out of toilet paper, and, you know, so oil will be next, and then Mad Max time. So
Yep.
on that note,
That's the progression.
Yes.
Let's have a podcast.
yes, yeah.
I don't know if you saw, but there are locust swarms in Africa
I
now,
saw that,
so
yes.
I don't know. I guess darkness is next, and then the firstborn child, I think, is...
You forgot about blood.
Blood, yes. So
So these are the plagues.
we've
Yeah.
got some... Yeah.
I didn't see monkey gang fight on the plague list, but that
was pretty cool, though.
And that was pretty amazing. The Thai monkey gang fight. Amazing.
There is a plague that's just wild beasts with no extra
there you go.
information. So,
Okay, so
Yeah.
there you go.
yeah, we are.
For all we know, it could be Thai monkey gang fights.
Yeah. 10 monkey gang fights. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the 11th plague, if the list continued, would be technology. So, transitions.
Wow,
All right.
That was really smooth.
I know. Thank you.
Smooth.
Yeah. I'm very good at
So wait,
transitions.
is technology the plague, or
Well, I mean, technology will someday kill us. So,
the robots?
Terminator.
They're already here.
Yeah.
They're already here.
This has started off really well.
It has. It has. All right, Marc, I want to talk to you about databases.
Ooh.
That sounds great.
So-
do you want to talk more generally about nonprofits and technology, or do you want to dive right into databases?
No,
I'm
I guess-
fine either way.
Yeah, let's start with nonprofits and technology. So,
No, let's start ultra specific
Yeah.
and then work back out.
So for many years while you were in Boston, you were another kind of evangelist for Salesforce.org, which was the sort of nonprofit wing of Salesforce.com, correct?
That's correct.
For people who don't know, if you are a 501c3, you are able to get Salesforce for free, correct?
Yes, I'll caveat that a little bit.
All right.
We don't like to say for free. We like to say that you get 10 licenses of our product donated, and we can talk about this. But there is a distinction, right? Because your time is not free, and getting a piece of enterprise software like Salesforce set up for your organization takes potentially a significant amount of time. So yes, although we do not charge you for the user licenses, it is not free.
And they're actually an organization here in Tulsa that helps implement. 501 TechNet has done it in the past. I worked with a nonprofit organization that used them to help implement. But even taking all that out, I mean, it was one staff member for a very significant amount of time.
Yeah.
Getting all of the information in there, you know, all the donors, constituents, just every piece of information you want in there. Somebody's got to put it in there. It's not magic.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. And the analogy that I often use is when people say free, I'm like, hey, would you like a free puppy? Because free in this instance is, you might not be a dog person. And by the way, you need to walk your dog a couple times a week, and you got to bring those poop bags. And there's a lot that goes into that. So you may or may not be ready for a free puppy.
Yes. Chris knows all about that. They've been boarding puppies recently. So
Fostering.
Not bordering.
Yes.
Boarding. That's the word I was looking for.
Listen, we've already decided that words are hard for us.
Yes,
today.
words are hard. Well, the world is coming to an end, so words are hard.
Yeah. So what is the pitch to a nonprofit for using Salesforce.org?
So I'll just confess to say that the official wording can be seen on the Salesforce.org website at www.salesforce.org. But how I like to talk about Salesforce, and when I'm talking to nonprofits who are considering using Salesforce, I I say that it has the ability to connect all the information about your constituents in one system. So that's not just using it for things like donor management or marketing and communications or your program tracking. It's a place to do that all in one place. So I think one of the struggles is that organizations usually have something to do each one of those pieces, but they don't necessarily have a system that can do all of them together. And I think that's really the power of the Salesforce platform. It allows you to do all of those things in one single system. Now, that said, you still have to set it up, and it doesn't require zero effort. It does require some effort to get it all configured and so on. But the power, once you have all these pieces in place, is outstanding.
I think I know from my own past and other nonprofits that sometimes when Salesforce.org is talking to organizations, how do they convince them that it's better to spend more time now trying to build a full system than going sort of the easier route of, a program for each thing?
So I'll answer the question a little bit differently, which is that it really depends on what you need. And Salesforce is a fantastic, powerful system, but depending on where you are in your organizational lifecycle, you might not need something as powerful as Salesforce. Now, I'm speaking to you as yes, I work for Salesforce, but because it is a donated product, right, I don't have to sell you on anything. So I think for organizations that are at a particular life stage, have the ability and resources to customize Salesforce to make it work for them, it's true that it can do all the things. I also think that Salesforce is really powerful. We have our own app exchange, which is kind of like the app store for Salesforce, which allows you to plug in different best of breed solutions. So if you want to use, for example, an email marketing tool, there's a whole selection of email marketing tools that are available that plug into Salesforce. Same with doing something like online fundraising, same deal. So you kind of have your choice of these different tools that integrate with Salesforce. So I think I don't necessarily push organizations to use Salesforce because it does these all-in-one things. I push them, I shouldn't say I push, I say, what are your needs? What are your organizational needs? And then let's find technologies that supports that. And I would say that maybe zooming out a little bit from Salesforce specifically and talking to organizations, specifically nonprofits, about their technology needs, I think they often start with what's the free thing, what's the lowest cost thing, what's the thing that's the most urgent thing that's on fire now, and let me apply technology to that, rather than doing kind of a more nuanced and thoughtful requirements gathering process and then finding the solutions that are available. I'm going to point to a couple of resources here for folks you can put in the show notes. Idealware.org is one of my favorite sites it's kind of a consumer reports for nonprofit software. So pick a category of software, and Idealware has kind of reports based on those, software that meet those different categories. So like donor management, for instance. TechSoup.org, which if you've spent any time in the nonprofit sector, you know that TechSoup is kind of your go-to place to get software. They have really active forums as well, so I encourage you to participate there. And then the Nonprofit Technology Network, that's for folks that have some sort of responsibility for technology or your organization, even if you're program staff or fundraising or marketing, right? You've been dumped the technology responsibility. Join N10. N10 is a national network, international network of people who are responsible for tech at their organizations, and that's ntn.org.
God, I wish I knew about that. I was always the tech guy at the jobs I was at, even when they had IT departments, because sometimes people are afraid to go to the IT departments.
So yes, what's usually the biggest technology need that you see with nonprofits?
Yeah, it's interesting. So N10 has a book called Managing Technology to Meet Your Mission, which I highly, highly recommend. And there's a scale in that book about kind of the different, where are you in your technology planning, stage, right? Are you at sort of level 1 where it's totally reactive, everything's on fire? And in those particular instances, right, it's like really fundamental stuff like, is there any sort of management of computers, right? Is there a shared file system? Really like basic stuff around security, those kind of the infrastructure, if you will, of the technology. That tends to be one of like the most urgent things, right? Are people bringing in their own computers and running the organizational information off of their own laptops? And then if you go into, more sophisticated, now you're using technology systems to manage organizational information. So maybe they're using Google, right? The Google suite of products, or Microsoft, right? Office 365. So then sort of one level up of how are we managing the organization's information? That's email, documents, and so on. And then if you think about going another level up from that, now are there specialized tools to do things like communications and marketing, to do stuff like your program management or tracking, your social services organization, do you have a case management system, that kind of stuff. And then sort of moving on up the different rungs, all the way to theoretic when you're self-actualized, I guess, to use a totally different metaphor here, is, you have actually a technology planning process that then you're able to evaluate the different pieces of tech to fit in with your organization and where you're going. You really want technology to empower employees to do their jobs effectively, rather than have it be a barrier and get in their way. Especially now that as we all move to remote work, is your technology helping you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, considering we are now in the phase of COVID-19 where a lot of people are going to be working from home, technology and software that people use have been moving more towards the cloud anyway over the past decade or so. But I think now there's really going to be a very, bright light shown on the fact that the majority of work people do in sort of office jobs, they don't actually need to be in their office to do it. And I'm guessing, like, now there's going to be a lot of, I think, interesting tests on sort of, I'm not even sure how to phrase this, but like, I know a lot of like internet and cable companies are removing bandwidth limits and other things because they know there's going to be more work done from home. I'm wondering if Salesforce has had conversations about, are they ready for like getting lots of like hits or, bandwidth from, instead of centralized locations, more, sporadic locations, or if that even matters in this case.
Yeah, so Salesforce is a cloud native company and has kind of from the beginning always been offered as software as a service. So, any questions about bandwidth or load or those sorts of things, like Salesforce has already dealt with it. So it's definitely not something to worry about, I think, on the Salesforce end. I think thinking about, nonprofit organizations being able to support remote work from a technological standpoint, I think is a different story, right? There's kind of two pieces to this. There's the technological piece. So things like, do you have any sort of a VPN or security type systems, setups, those sorts of things? Do you have devices that are managed by your companies, by your organizations, and are those devices set up to do things like two-factor authentication? So that's sort of the technology piece of it. And then there's the cultural piece, which is, okay, are these organizations set up for remote work, right? Are you kind of ready to support your team remotely when, particularly in nonprofits where the culture is much more face-to-face and consensus decision-making based, can you translate that into a virtual workspace?
Yeah, I think that's something. I work for a mid-sized bank. We happen to be a large Salesforce customer, but for us, data security is huge with everything we do, whether we're on site or working from home. And it's something I always wonder about with nonprofits. How many of them are actually prepared for true data security especially when they get large enough that really matters? Yeah,
I would say certainly larger organizations tend to be more prepared, as in they usually have staff that are dedicated to this type of function. But when you look at the the size of nonprofit organizations in the U.S., like a vast majority of them are under $500,000 in revenue, right? They're running on maybe volunteer labor or a half-time person, maybe one founder, but they're super small. So I would say that those organizations in particular are most at risk of not being able to handle this type of thing. And I think as we're seeing with other small businesses, right, that are not prepared to weather this kind of storm, I think nonprofits are really this is going to hit them, particularly smaller organizations, very hard. And I don't know what the numbers look like now, but I feel like the last report that I saw around, I don't know if it's Giving USA or some other nonprofit report, but many of these organizations don't have 6 months runway in the bank, right? They're really precariously financially positioned. So I think it's going to be a very telling, next few months, unfortunately.
I mean, yeah, the last place I had a full-time job at, whose name we do not mention on this podcast, they didn't even have a sort of shared cloud drive accessible outside the office because they had been hacked a year before via their, remote desktop that they were using, which wasn't very secure remote desktop. And instead of like finding a better version of that, they just didn't allow that. So there was no sharing between even different departments in the place. And I'm like, how are they going to work from home? They can't share the same documents unless they were like me, put all of their the internal share drive stuff on their Google Drive so they could access it from home. How are they going to work? How are they going to do their work?
Right.
And
right.
I doubt they're the only ones like that. So
well, and it
very
doesn't
much
even
not.
cover how organizations that do direct service, because some of those organizations are going to be needed even more now with schools and other organizations not providing the same level of service. So how are they going to safely provide that service, not just from a technology standpoint, but some of them have to physically be there and physically interact with people. So how do you give people what they need but keep from potentially spreading?
Yeah, I think so California, as I'm sure you both know, has a pretty severe homelessness issue. And, there are a lot of folks experiencing homelessness here. And, I'm fortunate in that, the area that I live in, San Diego, is, there are homeless folks around, but it's not totally overwhelming like parts of San Francisco. And it's a big issue here. And I've donated to some local organizations, but I haven't really done any hands-on homelessness work. And yeah, the organizations that are serving those individuals, it's a huge problem, the potential spread of COVID-19. So I have no idea what sort of precautions they're taking. But it's really scary.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see sort of happening the way companies deal with their internal data and infrastructure and sort of workload going forward? If we're really it looks like this, at least the sort of the self-exile to home is going to be at least a 2-month process. What do you see work becoming in the next 2 months? How organizations that aren't used to maybe having Zoom calls all the time or using the Microsoft Teams or Slack or any of those things, where usually those were internal office things where you could, if something was complicated, you could just go talk to the person. That's not going to be the way it's going to work for the next maybe 8 to 12 weeks. So
yeah, I think this is going to push a lot of organizations who, look, it's no secret that nonprofit organizations are generally not technology early adopters, right? Yes. And I think this is going to push a lot of organizations to start using some of these tools and figure out what works. I think what will become very clear over this time is really what is going to, is there going to be a cultural shift within the organizations as well, in addition to, starting to use these technology tools? Because I think one of the challenges is, and again, this is not a secret, not a surprise, is, right, you have kind of when you look at the age demographics of folks who work at nonprofit organizations, you sort of have the founder/boomer, then there's a bit of a dip, and then there's the sort of younger, naive, idealistic folks who are either coming out of school or coming out of programs, master's programs in nonprofit management. So it's super interesting. And this is a whole other conversation, which I recommend following up with the Young Nonprofit Professional Network, ynpn.org, to talk more about this. But I think those mid-career nonprofit folks, there's this big gap in those folks because for whatever reason, their nonprofit experience led them to, this is unsustainable, or I can't make enough money, money, so I'm going to leave the sector or I'm going to go back to school, or, what have you. So what happens is you have these two kind of double hump of what that graph looks like in terms of the age groups. And I would argue that the younger people, although they are early technology adopters, they aren't necessarily thinking about organizational technology, right? They might be more used to, doing social media or their own personal technology, but they're not really thinking strategically about how do I use technology in my organization. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. I hope that this use of technology will stick, particularly at organizations that are smaller and more nimble. Well, they'll be able to take most advantage of this stuff, particularly around speedy communication. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there will be a cultural shift around this stuff.
Well, I feel like in my experience, it was always one of the biggest problems was that anytime you wanted to spend money on technology, it was very hard to convince like the members of said nonprofit's board of directors that it was worth spending that money, because it's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And, they are not of the age where that was a thing you would spend that much money on. But, trying to explain that, we need a cloud-based, email service, like the email server should not be on our premises. Like we should have shared drives, that we should be using a, internal chat type program so that we don't have to run to each other's office to ask people questions. So there's less emails in our email box. It was always hard to get them to understand that was a worthwhile investment, and a worthwhile investment they themselves should be helping the nonprofit to make.
I would argue that it's not just technology, but organizational development in general is something that a lot of nonprofits don't focus on, not just from a money standpoint, but from a time standpoint. Like Mark, you were mentioning the young idealist who is their focus is on, helping people, right? So they want to get out there, do the program work, or maybe do development work and write grants, not thinking of how do we build an organization that is sustainable, whether it's through technology or developing staff or training or documentation and procedures, all that stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't want to stereotype that's, old people bad at technology, young people good at technology, because that's not what I'm saying. Like, right. It is very much around thinking strategically as an organization. Mm-hmm. And, as an org dev in particular is super challenging at nonprofit organizations, because, right, the way that organizations are incentivized is this stupid overhead number is the magic number, and you have to stay below 10% or whatever. And forever, anybody who hasn't seen the Dan Pallotta TED Talk, that's, I recommend that you go watch that. But yeah, I think it's true that technology has traditionally been on that, it's overhead, we're not going to fund it. Same with organizational development stuff, learning and development for employees. I hope that this crisis will put a spotlight on, maybe we should invest in this stuff, because if something like this happens again, then, you want to be prepared.
Yeah. And I think some of the more sophisticated funders are starting to focus more on outcomes, less on, what is some, arbitrary percentage or something like that. They're looking at, how many people are you helping? What is the money being used for? Which is showing a little bit of a better, showing that organizations can be effective even if they're at 20% overhead or whatever, than an organization that is so thin at 10% that they can't actually be nimble and help that many people.
It was interesting in Boston to watch that transition happen a little bit earlier than it's happening here, where there was a very large push from the larger nonprofit organizations to be like, we need to talk about what you're calling overhead, because what that is technology and talent. Right. And if we don't have the money to hire the talented people, then we're never going to get the outcomes that you want. Mm-hmm. And, viewing nonprofit professionals as professionals is a constant problem. And that's definitely something I noticed here a little bit, that the view of nonprofit professionals as sort of glorified paid volunteers is something that needs to change if they want to actually successfully accomplish the goal they're trying to accomplish. But so let's now transition to the more specific thing we talked about earlier. I want to talk about development databases in particular.
Cool. So we want to talk about fundraising.
Yes. I just want to talk about the technology side of it, because that's what I dealt with the most. And I always found it interesting that it's one of those things, like in technology a lot, that the people who design something, like, who are very talented in user interfaces and the coding parts, but aren't necessarily, they don't know what the job is that they're building this program for. And then the person using the program is like, why is this here? Like, this doesn't help me in any way. Like, why is it so complicated to get from A to B to C? And that mostly, that affected me the most when it came to like running, financial reports, like on gifts over time, the soft crediting of foundations to the person, like all these different things. Like some of them were there for legal reasons. Some of them were just there because, I don't know, that's how they decided to build it in. But I'm curious about how Salesforce specifically sort of when they build something new, or when they're, switching from, a couple of years ago, Salesforce switched their user interface from one thing to another, and there was a lot of hubbub about that. I know you can still switch back to the old one, but like, what goes into how you build what it looks like to the people using it versus what it's doing, like sort of behind the scenes?
This is a great question and gets, I think, to the heart of software development. So I want to go back to the example that you used, because you talked about development databases, but you talked about running financial reports. So your user persona, if you'll forgive the tech language here, your user persona here is you're actually finance user, right? You're not, you may also be a fundraiser, but I'm guessing that my needs as a fundraiser are a little bit different than my needs as a finance person, finance user, right? So if you sort of put your fundraiser hat on, right, I need to be able to quickly look up information about people, about foundations, about grants, right, donations, individual donations, and organizational donations. Those are the things that I might need to do as a fundraiser. However, as a finance person, I need to run a report on all the grants from a particular funder, or all the donations that came in this calendar year, or fiscal year, or something like that. So, and there's an overlap there, but it's not a one-to-one, right? The finance needs are a little bit different than the fundraising needs. And by the way, just moving, we don't have to go too far down this road, but like your finance report might count that donation when that check comes in, but your fundraiser is going to count it when they get that verbal commit, right?
Yes.
So the sort of optimistic, like, well, I'm going to count this thing because they said that they were going to give the money. And the finance person says, when I get a check is when we're going to count that, right? And that's when it's going to go on the book. So again, the reports that the fundraiser might need versus the reports that the finance person might need are a little bit different. So when folks are, when you're thinking about, hey, this system doesn't seem to be designed for my needs, it's because people either don't understand the business, right? So they don't really know what the business process is, or the user, the user persona is off, or the use case is kind of not 100% there. So I think there's a whole mix of factors that go into this stuff. I'll say this about the Salesforce.org product development team. I kind of can't really speak to the Salesforce.com team, but the .org product development team, many of those folks actually came from nonprofits, and they know what those user stories are, those user personas, because in many cases, they were those people, right? They were either the IT person responsible for managing it, or they were fundraisers, or they were, marketing folks. So a lot of the folks at Salesforce.org have actually kind of lived it at their various organizations. So when they're building it, they're sort of building it to themselves. But there's a whole product council, and they work with customers to kind of test and prove stuff. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say there's a nonprofit stream, there's the nonprofit cloud, but there's also an education cloud. So there's a bunch of tools available for higher education and K through 12 education customers as well. Ultimately, no database survives contact with the users. Right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
That's right.
The same with any piece of technology, right? When you give people technology, they're going to find a way to kind of use it in ways that you didn't expect. So all you can do is test, and get it in front of people sooner rather than later. So it's the same with donor databases, and just the same as apps on your phone and so on.
Well, I'm always fascinated because a lot of times the stuff that you have to do to sort of optimize, whether it's a database or a program, so it performs, it runs as quickly as it can so people use it, versus the things you have to do to make things, I'll say nicely, user-friendly. But frankly, a lot of programs you have to kind of idiot-proof, otherwise people won't use them, right? It has to be exactly where they want at every moment. So, I'm always fascinated by how you balance those two things.
Yeah, I think I'll go out on a limb here and say one of the common criticisms of Salesforce in general, and to Salesforce.org and the Nonprofit Success Pack, is that it's there's too it's too complicated, right? That's sort of an overall criticism. And I think where that comes from is, we've kind of erred on the side of giving you a lot of control as an administrator. What that means is there's a lot of flexibility and there's a lot of ways to set the system up. I think where folks where that criticism comes from is there aren't enough of the here's a wizard to do the thing, right? And there are other tools that are out there that are much more streamlined and much more user friendly, but perhaps not as powerful and not as configurable. I think Salesforce is in its infinite, near seemingly infinite configuration. It is complicated, right? And with great power comes great responsibility. But because it is more complicated, more configurable, it can handle so much more in terms of use cases and all those sorts of things. But for a super small organization that is laser focused on doing donor management, and that's really the thing that they need, Salesforce might not be the right solution for them. There are other solutions out there for that.
So we have a lot of entrepreneurship type programs here in Tulsa, and there's a lot of people starting out trying to do new things, trying to build their own businesses. And so this is more of a Salesforce.com versus Salesforce.org question, but you've already mentioned some resources for how best to figure out what programs you need and researching what has worked and what hasn't. What else could you recommend to people who are they're starting something, say for example they're a business of one person, and hypothetically speaking
happens to be a podcast production
possibly
company,
just hypothetically, what systems are good, what are the best systems to sort of put in place first when someone is just starting out in a sort of a new business, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit business?
Yeah, so I'll go back to what we were talking about earlier, the kind of different levels of technology. I think, fundamentally, you need some way to manage information at your organization, right? That's things like email, calendar, documents, right? Those basics, you got to have those, even if you're an organization of one. I was a consultant, and it was just me, and I helped organizations implement cloud-based technology. This is a few years ago now. This is prior to my joining Salesforce. And, I was a company of one, but I needed to store documents. I needed to, send emails. I needed to maintain a calendar. And could I have done that with my personal Gmail? Probably. But in this case, I paid for Google Apps. The G Suite is the kind of new branding of it. But I was I know that I want the additional functionality of the business stuff, not just because I could do things like video meetings and calendars, but I wanted the ability to, there was some other functionality that was really useful for me as a business owner. I'm trying to remember exactly what my needs were, but I was pretty clear. I actually went through a proper requirements process. Okay, what do I need, right? As a one person business owner that is probably going to work with freelancers. I knew that I needed, a couple of different email aliases, right? I wanted an info at, I wanted a help at, these are the kinds of things that if you're doing, if you're setting up sort of a business or an organization, right, this is not something you really want to run out of a Gmail, personal Gmail account or personal email account or Outlook email account. I lean towards Google, but Outlook and the Microsoft suite of tools have come a long way since I was looking. This is probably 10 plus years ago. So again, figure out what your needs are. Find the solution there. Don't just listen to me and what my needs were, because they may be different than what your needs are. So information management, first thing. Second thing, do you need to do things like, again, thinking about a small nonprofit, are you doing fundraising? Okay, great. That's a need. Are you doing more than fundraising? Are you doing marketing and communication? Okay, that's another need. There are a bunch of tools that are available to do that kind of stuff. Things like podcast production, for instance, there are a whole bunch of specialized tools to do things like that, to either record podcasts. There's hardware, there's software, and where are you storing these giant podcast files, right? Because these things can get really big. So again, these are the specialized tools for in this case podcast, but in a nonprofit, right? You might be doing intakes with your with clients, and how are you storing that information and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of, I think, organizationally, you want to make sure that you have the kind of software technology. And we haven't even talked about the hardware. Like, if you're a full-time company, you should probably have company-owned hardware, right? So there should be a proper organization set up. So if you're a nonprofit, you're a 501c3. If you're a business, you're an LLC, you're a corporation, right? You're an S corp, you're a C corp. This stuff gets into, you should talk to your legal person and your tax advisor, because there's all sorts of implications here. But when you're thinking about these things, right, there's a lot that goes into, okay, we're setting up an organization, and now we need to think about our technology strategically, as opposed to, I'm going to buy a laptop and buy the Apple Care plan for my MacBook. But it's much more than that as an organization that you need to be thinking about.
Well, and I think, what you said, early on there is that you went through a full, needs assessment. It seems like a lot of people, whether they're an organization or an individual, they start with a solution in mind, or whether it's, they've heard about Google, so they're going to go with that and then figure out which needs that will solve, instead of going the reverse and saying, okay, what are my requirements? What are my needs? And then figuring out what's the best solution. And that seems to be a pretty significant organizational issue that I see even in very large corporations.
100%. I would say on the nonprofit side, Idealware has some really great workbooks to kind of take you through that requirements gathering process, even if you've never done it before. So I can't say enough good things about Idealware and TechSoup and N10 as resources for folks who work at nonprofits to go through that process, because otherwise it's a mystery, right? You don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very interesting. I should start using my personal Gmail account for my business. But anyway, I already have too many email addresses to begin with. Anyway.
You can set up forwards. You can set up aliases.
Yeah.
You can still check one inbox, but you should not be using your personal Gmail for your business.
Yeah, who would do that? Amateurs. There's actually the company in town that we were talking about, other than 501 Tech. There's also a nonprofit, Asimio, that does sort of Salesforce implementation. I mean, I think they use other services if need be, but I know from conversations with their executive director that they help set up Salesforce for nonprofits here in town. So we'll link to them in the show notes if they pay us. No, just kidding.
I'm curious about that. I mean, because it is difficult. I mean, can be difficult and time consuming and takes some level of expertise to implement. So what kind of support or recommendations does Salesforce.org make with the nonprofit?
I'm so glad you asked this, Chris. So we have an online learning platform called Trailhead. Trailhead is the fun way to learn Salesforce. And we have a whole bunch of trails. So think of a trail like a playlist of cool learning modules to learn the Nonprofit Success Pack, which is the kind of primary product. And we have trails to learn the education data architecture, which is the kind of same thing on the education side. So I recommend that folks go to trailhead.salesforce.com, and you can filter by the nonprofit cloud to find the nonprofit products. So that would be place one that I would go. The other thing that you can do once you sign up for a Salesforce account and you kind of get your login and give your 501c3 information over to kind of get your account officially approved from a trial to a full featured account, you then have access to the Power of Us Hub. And that's our online community dedicated to nonprofits using Salesforce and education organizations using Salesforce. So you can participate in the community in the Power of Us Hub. And there are, I don't know the latest numbers. I used to know this, but there were thousands and thousands, and probably still are thousands and thousands of folks in the Power of Us Hub, where you can talk to folks at any hour of the day or night. There is somebody in there online willing to help you.
I used that system a couple of years ago when I was possibly getting a job that required a lot of Salesforce knowledge, and it's a really fun way of teaching you how to use something. It was really nice. I liked it. It was your recommendation.
Trailhead specifically.
Yes, I got many badges. Many badges with cute animals. So.
It's a gamified learning platform.
Yep.
So yes, you earn badges, you get points, you move up ranks.
It was pretty fun.
Is that learning for Salesforce.com as well as .org and the education?
You got it. Yep. It's across our full kind of suite of products, and it's actually not just limited to Salesforce. We have a bunch of content on Trailhead that is not Salesforce related at all. I think we've just put up some stuff around effectively working from home and doing really good virtual collaboration. Nice. So I think we're trying to highlight some of that content, obviously in these times. So definitely check out trailhead.salesforce.com. You do not need a Salesforce account to sign up there. You can just sign up with an email address. So check out Trailhead.
Do the Salesforce.com animals have like little monocles and top hats to differentiate themselves from the nonprofit ones? Anyway.
There are a number of different Salesforce characters. I encourage you to meet them all on Trailhead.
Yeah. One of them actually is the Monopoly guy.
Yes. Excellent.
No, that's under copyright.
Yeah. Monopoly-esque looking type person. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Old-timey rich man.
Yeah.
Do you have any other questions?
Sorry. I love the non-copyright version is just old-timey rich man.
Yeah. I mean, am I wrong?
I appreciate Mark just smiling in the background while we make fools of ourselves.
He's used to it. So
on the microphone.
So, I mean, listen, the greatest thing about being your own editor is that I can cut out this, and I will, so I'll sound better.
Nice.
So so if one of our listeners happens to work with a nonprofit and they would like to learn more, reach out, understand whether Salesforce is the right tool for them, what would they do? Where would they go?
So the first place that I encourage anyone who is interested in learning more is the salesforce.org website, and you can go to www.salesforce.org, and you can actually sign up for your own trial of Salesforce right then and there. You don't actually have to talk to a human. It sort of looks like that you do, but you don't. You can sign up for your own trial of Salesforce and get started with it. But again, as I've mentioned, it's pretty complicated, and it's not necessarily super intuitive. So signing up for a trial will get you started. I actually encourage folks to do Trailhead trails as well. So if you just go to trailhead.salesforce.com, you can follow along in the Trailhead trial and sort of see what the system looks like and see how it's intended to be used. So I think those two things are where I would go: salesforce.org and sign up for Trailhead as well, and look for the nonprofit trails. And of course, folks are more, I'm happy to, if you want to reach out to me directly, my email is mbaizman@salesforce.com. I'm not a salesperson, but you're welcome to reach out to me.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well,
don't worry, we can edit out the pauses. That'll be fine. I mean, there are no pauses. Wink.
Yeah. It'd be weird if I leave that part in to get rid of the silences. Well, again, we normally end our podcast with having our guests pick a nerdy thing in our recording studio to talk about, but since you can't really see anything,
I feel like we could still. Let's see. Okay, so what is your particular pop culture or nerd cup of tea? And we can do the reverse. Let him suggest something.
That's true.
See if you have something that fits.
I like it.
Are you thinking about if I said I love The Expanse, for instance?
Yeah. Hold on.
Do you have an Expanse?
I do. Hold on.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Yes. Yes.
So I have a little
Rosanante.
Oh, it's the Rossi. Yeah. Nice.
Haha.
Did you get it? Could you actually see the Rosanante there? Okay.
I could just a touch. Yeah.
Yeah. We're part of the Kickstarter for the big one, so we'll get that at some point in the future.
Cool.
Yes. That was in simpler times when the world wasn't ending. So.
Right.
But
I love Stephen Colbert, who was like, I didn't think I would ever say this, but boy, I miss 2019.
Yeah. That's true. Wow. Ooh. Well, cool. On that note.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thank you for joining us. Yes. Chris and I both love San Diego from our time there, sleeping on the ground for San Diego Comic-Con, and maybe we'll go back one day. I don't know.
I mean, if you're welcome anytime.
Yeah. If there is a San Diego Comic-Con in say 2021.
If there is a San Diego.
Yeah.
Too far? I think that's too far.
Too dark.
Too dark. Okay.
All right. Well, enjoy going back to your bunker, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining us for Pod for Good's first, but definitely not last, remote interview. Considering this interview was over 2 weeks ago, I can only imagine how stir-crazy Chris and I will sound for the next episode. Please help us help other people by sharing this podcast on social media and, of course, subscribing on the myriad podcasting services out there. Please stay safe out there, everybody. Wash your hands and get it done, Tulsa.